and welcome. You're tuning in to Unbreakable Hope with me, your host, Jessica Rose. This podcast is all about seeking the light. In each episode, we chat with someone who has either overcome the darkness or who is actively spreading light within their own community. So let's jump into today's episode. Thank you so much for coming on and being part of this episode today. I really appreciate you.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Well, I know a lot about your story because I've known you from a long time ago and I've been able to keep up with you over the years, but I'd love to give you a moment so you can tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself as we get going.
Of course, thank you. So my name is Landon Alchikh. I am a Marine Corps veteran. I served 8 years active duty, and right now I currently manage a nonprofit that deals with severe mental illness, and I'm also reaching to start my own, I don't think nonprofit, but I haven't decided yet, but essentially a business that deals with trauma recovery and suicide prevention. All of this stemmed from my own personal experiences. As you mentioned, of knowing my own story, when I was in the Marine Corps, I was violently attacked and raped by another Marine and a corpsman. That kind of sent me down this very dark spiral and having to figure things out, especially in an environment of don't ask, don't tell, and the whole stigma of men in general not being attacked like this and stuff like that, and having to figure that out, which has got me to where I'm at now.
I am, I'm just so honored that you're willing to come on and speak about your story. And it's so cool the amount of people I've met over the years. And I remember when we met and I remember like our first unit together and all these different moments, and I remember I got to read your book before it came out, and that was such a cool experience for me. I felt so trusted in that moment that you asked me to do that, and I was able to do that and read your story. And I remember reading it thinking, oh my God, like I knew him during this time. And now working in suicide prevention myself and really kind of opening my eyes to some things, I thought, holy cow, like I I had no clue what had happened and what was going on other than like the little side stuff, right? So
Mhm.
I'd love for you to take a minute and even tell people more about your book. I definitely love for other people to be able to hear your story because you brought up some very, very valid points. So many different barriers to getting support and don't ask, don't tell, and oh, that would never happen to a man, and just that cultural environment. So I would love to dig in more there.
Yeah, of course. So you're not the only person that read the book that knew me during that time who also agreed. I had no clue that that was going on. I never would have imagined that happening to you. And I even have people now who didn't know me during that time period, but have read the book and are like, I would have never imagined that you went through this. And it's very challenging to go through. I know that for a while I had a lot of dark thoughts, very shameful, regretful, and a lot of, especially being in the military, a lot of dramatic is what I like to call it, moments of essentially like suicidal ideations and threatening to do certain things. And I think at some point, a lot of, and I hate to say this, but a lot of the Marines were just like, yeah, 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 you're just being dramatic. Until our unit had that first suicide, and I forget her name, but after that, everyone started taking it a little more seriously, but no one really knew what was going on because I was so terrified of saying, hey, this happened to me. One, because generally speaking, nothing ever comes out of it, basically. But at the same time, I was so afraid that I would have been like a scapegoat where the Marine Corps, the Department of Defense would say, oh, he's gay, just remove him, kind of thing. And I did not want that. And so I just kept it in. I went through a lot of crazy isolation, hypervigilance, paranoia. I started cutting people out of my life. Uh, Part of it was just not wanting to get hurt again. And another part of it was intentionally trying to be this horrible person to make people cut me out of their life to then justify that and say, well, see, that's exactly what I mean. Like, no one loves me. I'm unlovable. I'm this horrible person. And that kind of spiraled. I ended up, I think it was maybe 6-ish to 10 months before I got out, I just completely crumbled. And I finally came forward and I told the uniform victim advocate what had happened and went through that whole process. Still did not want to cause a scene, so I did restricted. And what really got me into publishing the book was I joined Toastmasters and I had to give an icebreaker, which was a speech about me. And I figured, okay, well, this has been bothering me, and I'm on what I call the tail end of my recovery period of actually being okay with it. And so I figured the best way to really jumpstart that would be to share my story. And I left the room in complete shock and silence. And one of the higher ups of, I guess, my district at the time came up to me and told me that a larger audience needed to hear that. So I used that as my speech contest. I joined this competition. I started going to so many clubs in the San Diego, Yuma, and Imperial County and telling the same story. And I had so many people. I had a mother come up to me and saying that if she had heard this a month before, she would have had me talk to her son who had committed suicide because of the same reasons. And comments like these started to click to me. And I was like, wow, I need to do more than just speaking about it. And at the same time, I was competing with another member who wrote in a book her own story about surviving cancer. And she had told me that my speech inspired her to write the book. So I was like, okay, I need to write my story. And that is how Am I Worthy came into play.
I think it's so wonderful. And there's so many people who have amazing stories. And a lot of people, like you're saying, like there's so much shame and then guilt and what we put on women and men, right? Because that's it's when it comes to sexual assault, sexual harassment, rape, all these things is that we put this it's this crazy like burden on the victim, and there's still those questions, right? You bring up great points about even reporting it in the first place. What's really going to happen? I remember reporting some inappropriate behavior that was aggressive and sexual in nature, and when they asked my roommate at the time who was standing there when it all happened, she said, oh, I didn't see it. And I thought, what? Why why would you say that? Why would you say that you didn't see this person do this? Like, what are you talking about? So then it was like, oh, okay, well, she just must be making it up or something's going on. Or like you said, being dramatic, those kind of things. And that's a huge problem. And if people aren't able to reach out for support because they, for example, you've reached out in the past and then you've been shut down or you've been shamed and you've been further put down. I'm so appreciative of your courage and your strength to say, hey, I'm going to talk about this and I'm going to keep talking about this. I know Toastmasters has meant so much to you and you've done so much with them. Maybe some people listening hasn't heard of them before. So, would you like to tell people a little bit more about Toastmasters and maybe how they can even get involved?
Yes, absolutely. So Toastmasters is an international nonprofit organization which helps to teach and foster the skills of public speaking and leadership. I got involved honestly from just seeing a friend of mine who dramatically improved when they were extremely introverted become this very social butterfly. And I thought to myself, if they can get this out of a year, what can I get out of it? So, like a science project, I made a hypothesis, I joined, I figured out what I was going to do, and I have blossomed myself and I've stayed in it partly because of the camaraderie that I haven't felt since being in the Marine Corps, but also the autonomy to take these leadership opportunities that otherwise would not be given to me out in the civilian, professional, corporate world, to where I can try to, again, science project, see what leadership style kind of works and in what areas or avenues. As far as if anyone wanted to get involved, like you go to toastmasters.org and they have a location that allows you to find a club and you can put in your zip code and a mile range to find any of the clubs within your area. Some of the clubs do have restrictions. Usually those are the corporate clubs that have sensitive material. So their membership would either only be employees or they might have a hybrid, which is in person and online, allowing people outside of the company to attend online. But usually most of them don't have restrictions like that. There might be some restrictions because they're an advanced club. So you've had to have been in for so many years. to join this club kind of thing. But anyone can really get involved, and it's a great learning experience, even if you just do it for 6 months to a year, relatively cheap compared to what people in general spend on a weekend going out. So,
That's a really great point, right? Is where we value our money. So something like this, being able to say, hey, take one weekend off a month from whatever you're doing and be able to invest in yourself and invest in your growth and look at where it can take you. So that's really cool. I'm sure you've made a lot of really great connections throughout that time. And this isn't your first book that you've written either, which is really exciting because I remember when volume one came out, I actually I took it off my bookshelf because I wanted to make sure to be able to show people. So for those who are listening and not watching, so Writings of an Amateur Volume One, The Young Poet. Um, I've always loved poetry. So I remember when you came out with this, I was like, oh, this is so cool. I love poetry. And I have a friend who's written poetry and actually published a book. Like, this is awesome. Um, you published a few books. Do you want to talk a little bit more about some of the other books that you published as well?
yes, of course. And with the publishing, I've also republished. It's gone through a whole new branding. So volume one has a completely different cover now. But I have a total of seven currently. There's the first series, which is Writings of an Amateur. There's 5 volumes. The first one is all poetry. Second is short stories. Third is a collection of poetry and short stories, and I believe essays. The fourth one, same concept, collection of poetry, short stories, and essays. And the fifth one is all illustrations of photography, paintings, drawings, etc. But that had a revamp with some of the things that went on in my personal life. But then I have, after those 5 became my memoir slash personal development, I think is what they labeled it, which is Am I Worthy? And then after that, I have started a new series called Love and Tears, and I have the first volume out, which is poetry, short stories, illustrations, etc. And that is Quarantine Creations because it was a time during COVID, and I figured that was a very fitting title. But I will say my poetry has evolved so much since that first book. Sometimes I read those earlier works and I'm like, ooh, I just cringe at it because I was so young when I wrote it. But I feel that's normal with anyone when they look at past experiences that they've created something, they're like, ooh.
Have you found writing to be kind of healing through your journey? I mean, as you're talking about republishing and sharing more of things that happen in your personal life, obviously, when we're talking about the timeline, like when I knew you, when the events happened that you talk about in your book, Am I Worthy? And now this republishing, is that something that you feel like kind of healing through writing?
Partially, yes. I think mostly, right, I use writing as an outlet to explore whatever is going on in my head. When it comes to Am I Worthy specifically, that was a very cathartic and healing moment. It was extremely difficult. There were times where I would type a sentence and then I was done for weeks just because it was too much to emotionally handle. And Am I Worthy was essentially a 5-year writing process because of that. But then afterwards, when I was able to get it all done and written and kind of look back on it and say, yes, it's happened to me, but I can own it now. It's very powerful in that regard because now no one can use it against me to put me back in that shameful corner of isolation, basically.
I think that's so important and to acknowledge too, right? Like you're like, I'm owning what happened to me and I'm telling my story. I'm not having someone else put me in a box and put a label and tell a story. I want to be able to tell my own story. I know that it is a difficult read, but I was just telling someone the other day, my favorite things to talk about are all the taboo topics. So I think that this is so great because what we don't talk about we put in the closet, right? We turn the lights off and we make it dark and we put people in these black boxes that they can't get out of. And that's when people start spiraling and thinking that they don't have supports and help. Um, I know that reading your book, it took me a little bit to read through it too, because as someone who was your friend during that time, I just thought, oh my goodness, like I knew you personally. So I think I kind of took what you were writing, some of it personal myself, like almost in a defensive manner. I'm sure other people have probably felt that way too. And you mentioned having moms and other people come up to you after you talking saying, wow, like I wish more people would talk about this, or I wish I would have had you to talk to my person sooner. Are there other things that you've been involved with really helping with a sexual assault community, or maybe some other organizations that you're involved with that you're really investing maybe your time or being able to tell your story to help others?
Yes and no. I got involved with a nonprofit that deals with severe mental illness, partially because of my story. Now, it is specifically tailored towards schizophrenia. And personally, I have no personal story or relation to schizophrenia, but I figured severe mental illness is a way to be able to reach certain populations. Usually, people with severe mental illness, they not always, but they often fall victim to sexual assault and harassment and rape because of the fact that they have a severe mental illness and no one's going to believe them. And that's like the concept in general, much less when you have a severe mental illness. But I also not as involved, but I've done a few talkings with a nonprofit called Leap to Success, which is mostly focused on women who have gone through domestic violence or or like sexual assault and rape and stuff like that, and being able to provide them a safe environment to where they can kind of grow and learn, not learn per se, but like I guess relearn is a better word of finding their voice and their empowerment. And I've been invited to kind of share my not only my story with these amazing women, but also to give light to the fact that they're not alone, which in a weird way is dumb to say because you're never alone when you experience a situation like this. But society collectively has this concept that only women are attacked, and that's not the case. Men are equally attacked. And then when you look at me in person, you would never picture me being attacked because it's not like I'm a very delicate, daunty individual. I've got some mass to me. Not saying, like muscular mass. So no one ever sees me as a target. So then when you open people's eyes of like, oh, anyone can be a victim or a survivor of this, it kind of starts to draw more emphasis to this problem that we have and how we need to address it on a moral and ethical level, to be quite honest.
And that's, I mean, that's definitely said that that piece is what just it's always hard for me to kind of accept someone being a negative person and like the negative side of humanity, right? I have a hard time really believing that. Like my husband once said that the thing that he loved the most about me is that I always look for the good in everybody. So it's hard to be like, there is darkness, there is true darkness, and there are true evil people, and it's heartbreaking. But I really love to go back on what you had said too about the alone, because there is
Mhm.
a lot of messaging, right? Like you're not alone. But there is this sense of feeling alone. And in your situation, you're in this very underrepresented population for what happened to you. And by sharing your story, I was once told by a female veteran, obviously, my the story I'm sharing is very different, but she came up to me and she told me, she goes, I'm so glad there's people like you willing to get on a stage and talk because I could never do that. Right. So think about all the people who, sure, they know they're not the only ones, but having someone being able to say, hey, this happened to me. And this is how I was able to go and be able to grow and continue my life and not let it box me in a corner or not let me stay boxed in a corner, I guess is probably the better way to say it, right? Because you can't say that it didn't do that at some point, right?
Yeah,
I think that's when a lot of us go through trauma, right? There is that point where we are in the black box,
of
but being
course.
able to come out of it, I think they were probably really receptive to that, right? Even though there was that difference in a group of women and you are a male coming in there, that they were pretty receptive to your message.
They were, yes. I did make a joke of a comment in the sense that, of course, here I am, a man coming to like save the day because I was the only man there. But the idea, in a weird way, it made me uncomfortable at first because I'm like, I should not be speaking at this all women's event. But then after I got past that ego out, I guess you could say, I realized this is actually an honor to be able to come in because I'm not saying that I'm here to save the day. I'm here saying that I'm an ally with you. And this is something that I've learned in some of my feminism philosophy classes is generally speaking, society does not take women and their voices as seriously as a man. And I remember once my professor said that I need to use my privilege as a man to stand up for these communities, i.e., women who are not being taken as seriously. So when I started thinking about that, I was like, okay, this is actually an honor because I could help them as an ally to use my male privilege to get their voices heard. Because now it's being supported by a man. Not to say that they need the man to help them, but it's a weird concept I guess that my brain was formulating in my head. So
No, I can totally understand that too because I remember being in a women's group and there was a woman there and I won't share her story, but uh when she had been in the group multiple rounds and has finally got to the point where she was willing to talk about her story in front of a room full of women. And the saddest part was is that part of her betrayal was other women. And this was a military group. And I also remember being in that group and hearing everyone's stories. And then I was trauma comparing, right? Where I was like, oh, they've had it worse than me. Oh, they've had it worse than me. Oh, that's worse than me. So then I never really spoke up about what had happened to me. And I just kind of like, oh, well, this group, these people have it worse than me. It's fine. And I think that's something we do a lot too. So I could see that that also plays some dynamics is you're coming in a group full of women who may have likely been hurt by a man, could be another woman, like in my group situation, right? And then also saying like, hey, like I'm I'm here as well. I have a story as well. I am that ally and I want to be able to help you. And I want to be able to help you as someone you can come to say, hey, I've survived from this experience and I've gone on and grown. But also knowing like not all people are bad people. Because I think
yep,
we do that a lot in trauma, right? We generalize.
yep. Everyone's now an enemy because everyone can hurt me, kind of thing.
Hmm.
Yep.
And that's a protective factor, right? Like that's what our brain does. Like naturally, I heard in one of the groups I was in was positive is purposeful while negative is natural. Because we're trying to protect ourselves. So I could also see a lot of avoidance from when trauma, like we avoid situations, we avoid people, we avoid anything that could remind us of it. But then when we start to generalize, we avoid even further to the point some people who have experienced sexual trauma avoid even the topic, right?
Yep.
They don't even want to talk about it. They don't want to go to support groups. They just want to keep it in the black box in the corner of the room. Um, are there experiences that you've had along this journey? Because I don't like, I love your story so much, but I also want people to get your book and read your book to actually read your whole story. So, um, are there experiences like are along this journey? Because now you're not in the Marine Corps anymore, and you've had this kind of transition in what you're doing and a transition of who you are and how you represent yourself. Are there things along that journey that you might want to share a little bit that isn't going into like the whole story of your book?
Yeah, of course. Part of it, well, not part of it, all of it, the entire journey from start to progress, because I can't say finish, I'm still in it, is extremely difficult. And I think that a lot of people have this false idea that when they start to embark on self-development and healing and recovery, that it's going to start getting easier. And in some ways it does, but it really doesn't. It never really gets easier. And I even put this in the book. It is a constant daily battle. Some days you don't think about it as much because of the healing and development. But metaphorically, I related it to suicide. Metaphorically, once you've stepped out on that ledge, you never really come off of it. You're always on that ledge, constantly debating whether you should or should not take that leap. And so part of the journey is that it's extremely difficult. But one thing that I've noticed that is so rewarding is, and going back to what you said about people saying, oh, I could never share my story, is when they hear me speak or they read the book or they've just been around me when I'm working events to help trauma recovery and suicide prevention, is that when they see me and they know my story, in a weird way, not that they need it, but it gives them permission to take that step out of their dark corner. And yes, they may never share their story in a speech or a book. They may never paint it or write it or whatever the case is. But what I've noticed is that it slowly gives them permission to step out of the darkness and into the light. And they start doing things, I don't want to say like they used to before the trauma, but they get back into this mindset of everything's okay and I can survive and function as a quote unquote normal individual. And by doing that, they end up helping so many other people compared to if they were just isolated at home with the windows and the blinds down and closed and stuff like that. They're not doing any good. But by being around other people sharing their story, it allows them to get back out there. And sometimes they go on and share their own story. And I think that's probably the most rewarding part of this journey
Mm.
is seeing that.
They say the ripple effect, right? So you're really empowering them to say, I can talk about this. I can also help save lives. So you're starting in one part and you're touching those people there that can hopefully go on to further touch other people in a positive way to be able to grow from this. I always wonder, and I mean it's something like I guess I'll ponder back on myself, right? But if you looked back with everything that happened, was there something in the, I'm gonna say like the moment, like the aftermath, that would have been helpful then that you didn't get, that it was years later that you were finally able to get and access?
I think the biggest thing that I wish would have been there for me is at a very basic fundamental level, someone who would have just sat there and listened
Mm,
and not just listened, but actually believed me. Whether they then reported it themselves or not, but just someone that I could have gone to, that I could have said, this is what happened to me, and that they would have believed me. And I say that not to say that I didn't have people. I mean, you were there. I had other people that I worked with, but I was so afraid, part of, again, the shame, but the element of trust, especially in this environment that they tell you that, oh, if you report something to this nature, you can be dishonorably discharged and stuff like that. And I was so afraid that even the people that I knew internally I could trust, I couldn't trust because we go back to the trauma. It's like, I trusted this individual and they did this to me. So how can I trust anyone? And I think if at the very basic level, I just wish someone would have been there to listen. But at this point of my journey, I really wish that there would have been more. I don't want to say trainings because I think that the military kills the training. They overkill it to the point that I feel that it actually loses its meaning.
mm,
But I wish that there would have been maybe more emotional intelligence training, not necessarily like what are the signs of someone who's suicidal or what is sexual assault and sexual harassment? Like, not necessarily that training, but the training of emotional intelligence of if I come to you and I tell you this happened, what are you, the individual, now going to do? And how do you respond to this? And do you listen to this person or do you say, oh, it happens to everyone, or oh, you're just being dramatic or something like that? And it's like, no, like just listen to what I have to say. Like I have something important to say, and whether you believe me or not, I need you to just listen. And I wish that that's what I would have had because at that time, I don't think anyone, I know. I'm not even gonna say I don't think. I know that no one would have listened. And I only say that because I was constantly saying things and people were constantly saying, oh, you're just being dramatic. Oh, you're just overestimating this situation or whatever the case is. It's like, I remember telling someone that I would literally take off my chevrons and like threw them at the officer and was like, fuck you. And no one took me seriously. And I was like, I'm literally crying out for help and no one is listening and taking me seriously. And that is what I wish is that someone would have said, whoa, something's not right. We need to have a heart to heart conversation with him and figure out what is actually going on. And it didn't happen.
That would be a game changer, right? Because the valid point, right? When we go through trauma, again, generalizing, then we don't feel like we can trust people, right? Because a lot of traumas happen from people that you trust. So now it's who can I trust? And you bring up another good point about when people cry out for help, it's not I need help, right? Because the the trauma, it affects your brain, it affects your chemistry, it affects your entire being, how you can function and how you can move, and coupled with all these other layers of things, right? So that is a very, I say easy because I think you and I can be like, this is easy, let's plan it and get it done, is changing the structure of trainings.
Yeah.
Because that's something that I know when I go out and I talk about suicide, you go, ooh, the big scary S word. I talk about all the time. I wrote for a magazine that I couldn't say the word suicide because they had it listed as a trigger word. I'm like, so I can't say I do suicide prevention? Nope. How to reword it? Huh? So people are so afraid of things, or you have all those mandatory trainings, which I'm pretty sure around the same time, I think we were still in the same area. They had the sexual harassment and assault training. And I remember initially we were like in an auditorium, and the role was it was a female senior over the male who was the junior. And the whole audience was like clapping and cheering, right? Like,
Yeah.
heck yeah, get it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So then they realized, oh, okay, so the next year we get the exact same training, exact same one. But this time they took off the names, but we were all there the year before. So everyone still didn't take it seriously because they're like, oh no, like Lance Corporal Joe got with Staff Sergeant Stacy or whatever the name was. Everyone thought it was like so cool, right? We're
Yeah.
like, that wasn't the point. So you lose the message that there's other ways that we could be delivering these messages and empowering people to help, like you said, emotional intelligence. Think about how many people join the military to get away from their life, to get away from their trauma,
So
right?
many.
Because I think of that like it's a lot of people come in the military for different reasons, but we're all coming into it with whatever happened to us before that moment.
Mhm.
And when you're 18 or 17, like some of us, and you sign up and you go in, you may not have that. And we definitely come from different backgrounds with different morals and ethics. And that's another good point you brought up too, right? Is this is like this is a deep rooted issue when it comes to moral and ethics and family dynamics. Like, why would somebody think that it is okay to do the things that they did?
Yeah.
That's something that I have a hard time personally like accepting, but there's got to be something, right? Something along the line that we can't blame victims for running by yourself, right? Or all the other things that you hear. We what did you wear? That comes up so many times where it's like, did it matter? Did it matter? Right? It really it really just frustrates me how this is a societal problem.
It is. One of the jobs that I've had since being in, I worked with this phenomenal female, and she went to the manager to report that one of the clients was harassing her sexually. And his response in front of us was, do you not see what you're wearing, though? And she quit right then and there. And I lost it because one, never should that be your response. But let's just hypothetically say that that's okay. as the boss, that is never okay to say that compared to your employee and a client. Like, you should always take care of your own. And I say that, and I hate saying that because that goes back into the military dynamics of like what happened. They take care of their own, they sweep it under the rug. And it's like, okay, but where do we draw this line of what is supposed to be taking care of your own and what is not allowed, basically? Like, who is to say that? And I get so triggered with that because one of them was like the golden boy of his unit. So of course nothing would have been done. They would have taken care of him. But then at the same time, it's like, okay, you're taking care of him, but you're not taking care of the actual person that got impacted by this.
Yeah, that's that is another really good like like mind-boggling thing is you can take care of your own. I know this in like there's a few different work situations I've been in where somebody, that's what it was, is, oh, that person would never have done that. That person never would have said that. That person is, the greatest thing since the greatest thing nowadays. I don't know. Sliced bread isn't the greatest thing created nowadays, I guess. So it's like, okay, but why would I lie? And then
Yep.
then that goes into the double standard because where we were at in our unit, there was the girl that lied about the guy, and he was in the brig for months. And there was a few of us where she admitted to lying and making it up. And I was like, what in the world? Why would you do that to somebody? And then like it's now like this whole like double side thing, right? Is with that case, I remember what happened. They just they had to send the poor guy to a whole nother base because the Marine Corps is so small. They had to send him to a whole nother base to try and start over again. But what happened to her?
Nothing.
Right? So then it's like, God, then there's another like double standard, right? And
Yeah.
it's so frustrating. And when you talk about like what were you wearing and leadership and it being an issue, I actually had an issue where I had a colleague report me saying that he was concerned that how I was dressing was inappropriate. Um, I get called in. The policy for where I was at was the time is if anyone complains about what you're wearing, you get sent home for the day without pay. But I'm like, well, that doesn't sound right. Like someone could not like the color yellow that I'm wearing right now and be like, okay, go home, right? So I remember when my manager called me in and was like, hey, this is really awkward. And it was a female. And she was like, this is really awkward. And she told me someone complained about what you're wearing. So I'm required to send you home. Like she was very just confused by it as well. And at the time, I thought it was some of the other women who had said some other negative things towards me. But in the end, it turned out that it was a male colleague of mine. So I was told by my program manager that, yeah, I worked with a vulnerable population. So I worked with veterans who were either homeless or on the brink of becoming homeless. So they didn't have a lot of people. They didn't have a lot of connections. So I would always walk them out and I'd give them a hug and be like, okay, I'll see you next time. And I always wear dresses and skirts. That's just how I dress. So they told me that that was setting myself up to have one of my veterans take advantage of me sexually. And
Big
it went
blame.
on, yeah, yep. It went on further to say that I should really consider basically how I presented myself because did I want to be known as the pretty girl or as the girl who got stuff done? And I thought, wow, in that moment, I even said, well, I'll forever be known as both. Thank you for that. And that was a huge betrayal for me because I thought, wow, that's what someone thinks of me. They think that me wearing a dress or wearing a skirt is inviting somebody else. No, that's their mindset. That's their decision, right?
Yep.
And a sexual harassment and assault didn't even happen. They were saying that I was inviting it to happen. So I just get completely mind boggled by when when we do experience sexual assault or sexual harassment or any kind of aggression, especially in the workplace, like you said, oh, Johnny would never do that. He's a good guy. Or, oh, clearly Jess was flirting with him, right? It's this horrible loop that, yeah, we're protecting the wrong people. You should be able to pull that person to the side and have a conversation with them and not accuse them of anything, but being able to have a conversation
Mhm.
And then we're going into like layers of things, right? Like then our justice system, right? Well, our reporting system's already broken.
Yeah.
So how do we get there? Um, when you did report it, how did you feel like it was helpful at all, or that it was a hindrance? And that, I mean, I think everyone agrees that the reporting system is broken and could be adjusted, but it's not, it's something.
It was both. It was both in the sense that after I had reported it, I felt so much better that this deep, dark, secret, scary thing had been released into the world and that it was no longer infecting my soul or my spirit, however you want to word that. At the same time, it did not do that well, and partly because I was with a small I&I unit. So for those who don't know, that is when active duty is stationed at a reserve unit to help inspect and instruct reservists when they come in. Still perform my daily duties as my job during the time that the reservists aren't there. And all of the reserves were there, but we were such a small unit and there's only one UVA. So when I walked into her office and everyone saw that, and then I come out with some tears in my eyes, clearly everyone knows something just happened. And then immediately the next day, everyone had mandatory sexual assault and sexual awareness and harassment training.
Mm,
Even though I did restricted to where no one would know that it was me, it was pretty obvious that I was the person who came forward. And after that, I just remember certain people treating me differently
mm,
because well, this is what I think anyway. I don't know why people started treating me differently, but what I believe was the issue is one, of course, someone had to go and report this assault. So now all of us have to do this training that we just did a few months ago. So how dare I inconvenience everyone else, basically. The other concept that changed was this idea again that this doesn't happen to men. And so I had some of the other men look at me in a disgusted way because I, being a man, allowed this to happen to me.
mm,
Then that was sometimes paired with now being called slur words because of being a man assaulted. So they just assumed that it was another man, which the assumption in this case was correct. But it came with slurs now because now I'm this
mm.
man that allowed this to happen. And so it was in that regard, I was like, wow, this was so insightful for me to have gone restricted to now everyone knows who reported it, even though it's not officially on paper. And I was so glad when I ended up getting out because of the fact that with me getting out, no one knew that this happened to me or that I had reported it. And I could go, for example, I immediately went into school and no one knew this. So no one treated me differently. I was just another ordinary person, just like everyone else there. And I didn't have this negative stigma attached to me. And I was so happy to get out. And which is weird because sometimes I wish that I was still in because I feel that there needs to be a lot of change. And maybe this is arrogant of me to say, but what better way to lead that change than someone who's experienced the trauma?
No, I think that's amazing. And I think there's a lot of there's a lot of easy things that could be changed to help protect people. Like you bring up a like just astonishing point, right? You're supposed to go to an office that's confidential, where people see you walking into that office. Why is that office located there? How are there other ways that people could access reporting that doesn't require them to go publicly walk in an office? And yeah, if you're reporting something, you're not just there for a casual chit chat. You come out, there's going to be some form of distress on your face. You just had to talk about and disclose with somebody, and likely for the first time with somebody. that that's not appropriate. That's not safe for anybody. And then just what you said, right, is that what is the gut reaction? Oh goodness, somebody reported something. We need to just put more training on it. Put more training on it. Let's redo the same training that we already talked about that clearly isn't working,
Yeah.
right? And then what does that do? Then yeah, it puts more shame and more blame, and people are now mad at you because you were assaulted. Mm. Okay, that makes a whole lot of sense. Thanks for the support, guys.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah.
Um,
Which
yeah,
then only makes it to where people don't want to come forward. Because what's the point? What's the point of coming forward if we're going to get the same crappy training and nothing's going to get done except for to make me feel even worse now?
yes. I so my situation that my biggest situation I went through in the Marine Corps where I received a lot of my harassment and threats was was fighting for my medical care. And I remember all the harassment I got from it. And somebody told me because the CO, I had requested mass, and the CO was like, well, just have one person come forward and say they witnessed all this. And everyone was like, no, I'm not willing to go through what you've had to go through. I had monitored bathroom breaks because they thought that there was like this big grand conspiracy or something. I was like, I'm just trying to get the surgery for an injury that I had 2.5 years ago. Why are you taking it so personal? I'm not out to get you, but because you're threatening me and you're not helping me, you're now in my way. And I'm just trying to get you out of my way. So something for me like that was a physical injury. And I still had people of support I could go to, but the harassment I got from that alone, again, not even against these people, it didn't even affect these people. How I got treated, other people were like, nope, I am not willing to come to your defense because I do not want to have to be, I don't want to have to go through what you're going through. And so
Yep,
that's a
they
great
get
point. So,
targeted.
yeah, like, way to encourage other people to come forward and report things by acting irrational.
Yeah.
I just,
And I honestly have told so many people that are still in, it's poor leadership.
mhm,
And if we would get better leaders, the problem won't go away, but it will get better. But we just have really, really poor leadership.
mhm. We got a lot
And
of,
that's outside of the Marine Corps as well. Like that is just in general poor leadership. And partly because we don't have emotional intelligence. We grew up to shame emotions and connections so that whenever someone vocalizes it, oh, you're being dramatic, you're being irrational. And it's like, no, these are normal things that everyone experiences. Why are we demonizing it?
hmm hmm it just makes me think of um, when people always say, like, just pull up your bootstraps, right? In that generation. Well, let's also think about the generation where you could legally rape your wife because you were married, right? We've done some growing. We have a lot more growing to do, but
Oh, sure.
like you said, putting emotions in a box is definitely not how we're going to handle it. Actually talking about them and how we can move forward with them, that's what's going to help handle
I
it.
remember giving my officer the analogy that this is why people shoot up schools. Because they want to communicate the issue, they're calling out for help. And everyone is telling them that they're being dramatic. They need to pick themselves up by their bootstraps. And so they have to do something so extreme to get the attention. And now that they've done that, now they're the monster and the villain. And it's like they've been calling for help the entire time. If you had just listened to them, we could have avoided this. But no, it's their fault because they're being dramatic and extreme for being human and having emotion. And she told me that I was just as evil as Hitler for giving that analogy. And I said, but if you think about it, it will strike home and you will know that I'm being accurate with that statement.
Yeah, that goes back to like we were saying, like when people ask for help, it's not always direct because for centuries, right, we weren't allowed to have thoughts and feelings and things were controlled systematically. And as we grow through the decades and things change, I mean, it's astonishing and like almost like sickening to think about some of the things that have changed. Uh, like not all veterans got the GI Bill just because of the color of their skin. That that happened within the last 100 years. Like it's just it's astonishing, and that goes back like I can't believe it. I don't understand it. You know, like I'd like to think if I was born like 50 or 100 years earlier that I'd be that person kicking doors because I'm like this is ridiculous. It's ridiculous, and I think that that's a I mean it sounds fucked up, but it's true. People call out for help, and I'm not endorsing this because it very, very triggering. I get that like disclaimer, I guess. 13 Reasons Why. So I'm
Hmm.
not sure if you've seen it. If anyone's listening and hasn't seen it, you should probably keep it that way, to be honest. Because it is very triggering. Okay, it's extremely, extremely triggering. I They had like a show, like an after show that talked, and I thought that was great. But if you have seen it, you'll see where a lot of these people affected, they did reach out for help in the best way that they could. But like you said, there was nobody really listening. And then your trust is already violated by whatever happened to you traumatically, that you are just struggling to hold on. And that little bit, like the few people that you do try and reach out to, and when they don't click, and they don't get it, then you feel like, what else do I have?
That or you don't want to burden them,
Mhm.
or you don't want to stain their view of you. And so you try to hold it together and be as normal as you've been, which it is not the case. I mean, I've had so many people tell me that they knew something was going on, but they just didn't know what it was. Even my mom had told me after reading it, she's like, everything makes so much sense now. She's like, because you were so sweet and kind, and then out of nowhere, you became mean and horrible and vicious. And she's like, I thought I had done something personally against you, and you were just acting out to take revenge on me, basically. And it's like, it was never about you. It was about me the entire time. And I didn't know how to process, much less tell anyone else the mess of thoughts and feelings going on in my head. It's like, if I can't even process and understand this, what makes me think that you can?
Yeah, that's that's another really great point, is that oftentimes we don't want to call out for help because we don't want to put something else, especially those ones closest to us. I know I've found myself in that situation with my husband, right? Is had brain cancer since 2009, and then it came back, and then I think of it, it's I'm not the only one grieving. It's all of our friends have to grieve too. And this is a lot for them. So I'm literally calling my best friends who are also grieving, and they're also having to figure out a way to navigate this new life and this, is Andrew gonna die? Did he die? Like, is he gonna come back? Like all these, and every hill we come up on, everyone's kind of got to go back through that. Of course, it's different for me as the spousal relationship, but at the same time, there's a lot of times, like you said, I will withhold reaching out because I'm like, oh, but they're also in it too, you know?
And there's strength in numbers. Not to say that the more people you tell, the less pain you're going to feel. You're going to feel the pain regardless.
Yeah.
But weirdly, it's not as painful in a, I guess, metaphorical way, because you're sharing that pain with other people who love you, and like in your case, who also love your husband as well. So you're not having to shoulder that pain all by yourself, because now you have a community that is sharing that pain and is now empathetic to the situation and can help in ways that either they can help, or in ways that you're asking them to be able to help. Whereas if you don't tell anyone, that's all on you, and no one can help because no one knows, and no one can do what they can do because they don't know.
I tell people all the times to like name it. Like if you're anxious, you're overwhelmed or you're stressed out, just name it. At least tell people like, hey, I'm really maxed out right now. You don't have to always explain it, but then it gives them an opportunity to do something. And then I also encourage people to have a something that you do for people like that. Like um I was forever changed by this lovely woman. She lost her son to suicide, and just I learned so much from her and her vulnerability telling me. But one thing that sticks with me is, as she said later, when someone close to her lost a child, she said, she called, said, there's going to be someone coming to do the lawn on Thursday. And she took care of the lawn service. And I thought, wow. Because so many times we ask people, like, oh, what can I do to help? And then if you're maxed out and you're overwhelmed, it's like another item on the to-do list. You're like, I don't even know. So sometimes, like, if you're listening and you have somebody who tells you, like, I'm maxed out, I'm overwhelmed, or I'm stressed, or you just see somebody struggling, maybe even send them like a coffee gift card. Like have like something in your back pocket that's like your standard, like send flowers, right? There's little acts that we can do to help make people feel seen and remembered. Because I think that's a huge thing too, is when trauma puts us in that dark box, sometimes we forget and we can't see all the people that are actually there to help us carry that burden as well. I say burden, and I don't even see it that way, but it just came out of my mouth.
I know what you mean. Yeah. I think also it shows the individual, like in my case, I have a friend that when I am, when I've had my limit and I can't do anything, he will always order me coffee and have it sent to me. And he knows what I drink. And so then it makes me feel special, not because it's like, I'm going to drink coffee anyway, but now I don't have to go and do it myself because this drink has arrived. But it makes me even feel more special because someone that I know and love knows me well enough to know, oh, he drinks coffee. This is when he drinks the coffee. This is the kind of coffee he drinks. Let me do that for him. And it's like, okay, it reestablishes this sense of trust that if something were to happen, I can go to this individual and tell them because I know that they know me well enough because they know what I drink and when I drink it.
Yeah. And it's also a great, like, I tell people this in suicide prevention stuff too, is sometimes it's one little shift. When you're in the dark black box and you can't see out, it's a tiny thing that sometimes can crack that box open. So it could be a coffee, it could be holding the door open and saying, "Hi, like, I see you, I recognize you,"
Yep.
because that's a lot of the times what it is, right? A lot of people aren't seen and they're not heard just on a daily basis.
It
Um,
makes me think of the Rumi quote that talks about, and I think it's Rumi. I'm gonna have to verify this now, but the quote essentially says that it's the smallest cracks that destroy the dam. It's not the big things, but the small things. And so in reverse, it's the small things that also help to heal. Like you said, holding the door open or getting that coffee, that one little small action could have very well just stopped me from committing suicide because I now know that someone cares about me or someone's thinking of me or that I matter to someone else. And it's not like they jumped in front of me and was like, no, don't do it. It was just like, here's a coffee.
yeah.
That's all it takes. Sometimes, like you were saying, just
Mhm.
one little small action.
100%. And I think if we as humans can see that and understand that and treat other humans that way, right, that's what's really going to make such a positive impact. If you can just think of doing one nice thing for one person a day, for all doing that, how many people are going to be affected? It's just amazing. So I know we're coming up close on time, and this has been a really amazing conversation, and I think it's a very important one to have. I'd love to pass it back over to you if there's something that you'd like to say to wrap things up or reach out to somebody who's listening to this that maybe has experienced sexual assault.
The first and foremost, know that you're not alone. It may feel that you're alone, but you're not alone. And it's going to suck. I will be very honest with you. The healing and recovery process is going to suck, but it is so, so, so worth it. And something that my grandmother used to say is if the day just seems too long, you take it hour by hour. If the hour is too long, you take it minute by minute. And if that's too long, you take it breath by breath. And
Mm.
that's what I would say is take it breath by breath. Everything is beautiful in life, even the darker aspects, because they do always have a silver lining in them. You just sometimes have to look for it. As far as resources, there are so many resources. I could name them, but instead, I will say I have a handful of them in my book, Am I Worthy? I also, depending on where you're at in the world, would say the best resource you could probably utilize to get a resource is to Google using specific words, your location. They will give you pages of different resources. Some of them are in person, some of them are on the phone, some of them are anonymous online chats. It just depends on your style. You can pick male or female or they them individuals depending on your case. Just know that you're not alone, even if it feels like it. You have a huge community behind you. It just takes having the strength to take it breath by breath.
I love that so much. Your grandmother's very wise. Thank you so much for sharing that. And above all, thank you so much for just your courage and strength every day to be able to to move forward, like you said, sometimes it is day by day and it doesn't undo what has happened, but you learn ways to move forward and be able to take care of yourself. And I'm thrilled to and honored to know you and know this good that you're going to be doing in the world and how many lives that you're already impacting. So if you're listening, please, please, please follow, like, share. All of his links will be below. And again, I just want to say thank you so, so much for your time and your passion and dedication.
Thank you for having me as well.
Thank you, listeners, for tuning in. If you found this episode inspiring, please share it with someone you never know who needs more light in their life. May this serve as a reminder that there's always darkness in the world. Do not let it consume you. Always seek the light. Please take a moment to do the good old subscribe, rate, and review. Your support means so much to me, and it helps me spread more light and love. Until next time, be kind, be loving, be human, and don't ever let anyone steal your hope.